Alright, so here's my drift trike. I welded this frame together when I was 11 years old, not knowing what penetration was, and just listening to somebody who had told me just to put the 90 amp welder on full blast, full wire speed, and that's how that went. But it's held together pretty good. The only problem is this joint right here. It's a lot of weight when you're going over bumps and stuff. Just kind of caves in and then it moves side to side, so I'm going to weld that together, but clean it up first. The valves do float at what I'm thinking is like 5,000 RPM, which isn't much, so I could probably get it up to like 45, 50 if it didn't do that. So maybe some different valve springs, and the carburetor, I'm gonna definitely need to make a little bracket here to mount an air filter, and I think I might just stick this breather tube into the filter, like literally inside the paper, because it's got a lot of blow by, and I couldn't find, like, it came with the half of the air filter housing but not the cover, so you couldn't really put an air filter in there and seal it up. But yeah, you really want to have this, especially with this engine on such a tilt like this. It helps to keep the oil from going up into the cylinder, keeps it in the crankcase, and applies a little bit of a vacuum, which is definitely good. Keeps your oil good for longer too. The other thing is no brakes. It used to have a mountain bike front end, so it had brakes up there, but obviously I crashed it a few times because those weren't that good. One of the times, the main time I crashed it was not with me on it. I started it and this sketchy throttle here just kind of got stuck. I think the wheels were turned, or the front tire was turned, and it just grabbed onto the throttle and just took off. But yeah, it bent some forks up pretty bad, so those ones will have to stay because that's the only ones I have right now. But yeah, I'm gonna weld this up, put a throttle cable on it, and find something that I can do brakes with. Alright, so I got the same 90 amp right here that I made these welds with, except this time I got this torch, which is the MAP instead of the propane, which is really just propane except it's yellow can. That's not true, but basically the propane's gonna help heat that up, and then the low amp MIG that runs on 120 volt or 110, whatever you want to call it, will penetrate into there nice. And I was going to use my stick welder with the small, what is it, 1/16 rod or whatever, but I think it would probably melt the thing in half, so since it runs on 220. But yeah, this will be fine for this application as long as I give it a little bit of preheat and keep the wire feed speed down on like 2 or 1, just enough to actually get wire shooting out of it. The reason I haven't invested in a nice MIG welder is because of the gas and the cost. They're just so expensive now. I got that stick welder, TIG welder, and cutting torch all in one, and that was just $699, I think. But even that, the TIG torch still requires argon and helium or whatever. Just kidding. But yeah, I really haven't gotten into that stuff yet, and this one has been working out just fine for these little projects. I mean, the thing works. Alright, so I got that side done. A little bit sloppy, but that's what you get with flux core. Alright, so on that one, there was some smoke coming out, and I kept breaking up the arc, so it got a little bit layered up, but it's deep in there. Alright, so I got another weld in there, just barely, right in between the motor and that first bolt there to the left. That one penetrated both pieces pretty good. Got to do the other half now. Alright, so you can see there's two stacked up right there. That's because there's that little piece of shim underneath there. I wanted to weld that to the frame too. And then on this side, I kind of skipped a little by that drain plug because I may have to use that, you know, worst comes worst. But I think that what's going to happen is I'm going to end up, when I change the oil, if I even do, just take this little fill check out, which is not a fill check because there's one right there. But yeah, just take those out and tip the thing over. Now I'm going to go ahead and tip it over onto my header there and weld the underneath side. So you can probably see on the bottom side, which is that way, I kind of had a little bit of stacks going there, and the reason that it went away is because it just got so hot because of that preheat that it just started falling down, and it's not going to have a good pattern. So you got to keep it hot but not too hot if you want it to look nice, but I don't really care. Penetration is what I'm shooting for. So there I went real fast just to show you guys that the welder is capable of making a somewhat decent weld. But then once I got repositioned to do that corner up there, it fell down and covered most of that up. So as you can see right there, that is what happens when you don't preheat. So yes, it is necessary to do that with a 90 amp, even when the wire feed speed is on that and it's on max. Actually, I just lied. It's not on max, I just hit it accidentally with my foot. So that's like a whole 1.5 inches with the welder turned to max that it didn't want to penetrate. So yeah, now I have to grind that off and then try again with the preheat. But once it gets going, it's not very constant. Its welder kind of wants to do different things different times. It's like kind of bad here, and then it gets really, really smooth and you can't even see any layers. It's just kind of weird. And at the same time, we're dripping oil and gas all over the place. Take two. Now you can see how much better the start is. That little dab right there is actually my welding mask was on grind still. Now I've just got that one to do, and then I'm going to do a few gussets. That weld wasn't holding on there from when I was 11, so I went ahead and put a really nice weld on top of it. Look at that, they mix so well. And then I went ahead and got those ones done, that one done, and lit a pan on fire. Just to let you know, do not put gasoline in plastic pans, because what happens is when the gas catches on fire, then the pan burns too, and then you don't have a pan. So yeah, plastic pans are for oil and coolant and stuff, not for gas. You want to use the metal pans for that. And no, the drift trike did not catch on fire. Well, it did, but it didn't burn down. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and start on those gussets, and I'll get to you then. So I found this leftover, and I was just about to use this bed frame tubing right here. And no, the whole bed frame was not made out of round tube. It was angle, and then that was for another part of it that I don't remember. But then I found this, which I don't know why it's not part of this, but I guess they were just leftover cut-offs from that project. And yeah, we're gonna use this square tube. I know that that's stronger, but this looks a lot cooler, and there's already square tubing on it, so yeah, we're gonna use this. Alright, so I was gonna use this one, but you can see it's all folded up, so I think I'm just gonna be conservative and just grind the weld off of this one, use that. So I made my estimate mark right there, and that's just gonna be a pretty beefy gusset, just from right there to over there. And as you can see, that's a round tube, so the cut is going to be sticking out further than the thinnest point, because you're going to need to cut a little bit more than that off of the center parts, because it is a circle. Got to give it that radius. But I want to get 2 equal pieces out of this piece, so I'm basically just going to, I made a mark right there. I'm just going to measure from that end to right there, and then whatever the center of that is going to be the center of the 45. Alright, so I got these 2 pieces cut up. It was kind of hard to do it with the angle grinder because the blade can only go so far. You really want to use a chop saw, or you could use a reciprocating saw, but it's just hard when you have to make those cuts. You don't know if you're square or not. But I just kind of grinded them up until they were perfect, and they're both the same exact length, and I'm just going to weld them on there. The gap isn't big enough for me to need to notch the tube out, so it'll be fine. Alright, so here's the finished product. I got those all welded on there real good. The frame welded right there, and it's really solid. There's a little bit of, you know, movement that way, but like in the future I'm going to weld some pieces of rebar or something, bend them, and weld them on the sides there. And then maybe some like triangular pieces just going from here to here to make a triangle. But yeah, it's really solid. Like when you hit the bumps, it doesn't like kind of squat down in the middle. And I also moved the seat back a little bit. Just got rid of the back 2 bolts and it's fine. I'm gonna put something on the back because it is a little bit flimsy. It kind of goes into the motor. I tightened everything up. I'm working on getting an air filter, and I tightened all the valve clearances back down to the way they're supposed to be so it's easier to start, because this does have a built-in compression release on the cam. And also I spent $90 on these parts, just the cheapest brake kit that I could find, and they actually work super good. Like you barely have to push this, and you can't like, it's pretty clamped on there. If you just barely push it with your hand, you can't pull that out of there. So yeah, it's 1 inch, slides right on that axle. My plan is to have it somewhere back here. I don't know yet, but it is fully adjustable, and there's a very, very large amount of pad on this thing. I mean, look at that. So that'll last a really long time. And this thing isn't that heavy, so this should be fine, even with the handbrake. The only problem is they wanted to sell me a brake cable with this for like another $25, and it was for a foot brake, like for a go-kart, so it had the loop with the hole in the middle. And then I went and bought this one not knowing how big this thing is on the end. Like normally they're like this for the handles, but yeah, this thing's gonna need to get grinded down so that way I can put it on here. I don't want to get any like good decent throttle levers and brake levers. Those ones kind of look cool on the Trike, just to keep it simple. But yeah, I'm gonna have a throttle cable and a brake cable, and I don't think this is gonna thread into the because these threads are too coarse for that, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on the brakes. Alright, so I got the tire and the spacer off by just putting the axle nut on the axle and hitting the axle that way while holding onto the tire, and I did do it a little bit too far, and I kind of gacked a few threads on the end of there, but it'll go back on. And then now I'm basically going to loosen. There's some Allens in these pillow block bearings to keep the axles from sliding, or the axle from sliding back and forth. I'm just going to take the master link out of the chain. You can already see that I kind of hit it over a little bit just by hammering on it. This is a little loose, so yeah, those Allen screws just come out, and then yeah, it'll start sliding out. Alright, so I got both tires off just to make it a little easier. I had a pain getting the keyway on that one out since the tire wanted to go that way. So yeah, I eventually got it out, and I got the keyway for the sprocket off too, somehow. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the brake on. The alignment, I'll be able to tell where it goes by this right here, this mark, and I'll clean everything up a little bit and then start reassembling it. Alright, so I got everything back together and put this brake on, and I kind of stopped recording, but I got this little structure here welded on, tacked on, and I tapped the holes in this, which were elongated, so there's a little bit less threads on the outer parts, but it's tapped, and I got some nice bolts for it, and I'm gonna go ahead and put nuts on the back and weld the nuts on. And the brake caliper itself was a little bit too fat, so I kind of grinded a little bit off of there, and now it fits pretty well, so a nut will fit in there, no problem. And then welding the nut to there is gonna save me from having to stick a wrench back there and tightening it down, which wouldn't really work because these are threaded, so the nut wouldn't really ever get tightened. Alright, so I got the nuts welded on there, and then I re-tapped them so they're nice and loose and free, and I'm gonna go ahead and mock it up for the height on the brake caliper, and then mark and drill the holes in that piece of tube stock. Alright, so I got the bracket lined up and mocked up, and pre-drilled these holes and made sure they were nice and square and straight through, and then I flipped it over and looked at the back side to make sure that they were still centered, and they are. So I'm going to go ahead and drill them out to the proper diameter, and then I'm going to use this tube stock right here to put the bolts through to keep the square stock from crushing. Alright, so my holes are a little bit off, so I'm just going to go one size up a drill bit.